Particles are one of the most important things to understand in Japanese. They're the key to how every sentence works. In this video, I'm going to show you exactly what particles are, how they compare to English, and teach you a few of the most common and useful ones. So the big question is, what are particles? What are they for? What do they do? And how do we use them in sentences? To put it simply, particles tell us how each word in a sentence relates to other words. Sentences are obviously made up of several words, and it's not just a random string of unrelated things, they all interact with each other. They relate to each other in different ways to give us a greater meaning. And particles in Japanese are a major part of how that meaning is formed. Each particle tells us the role of the word or phrase that comes before it, and how that relates to other parts of the sentence. To see this in action, let's look at two particles you might already know. Take an example like this. Watashi wa sensei desu. That means I am a teacher. In this example, the wa tells us that watashi is the topic of the sentence. The wa comes after watashi. So wa is telling us that the thing before it, watashi, is the topic of that sentence. Another common particle is no, which connects two words showing that one belongs to the other, or that one is the possessor of the other. For example, watashi no kurama means my car. No tells us that the thing before it, which in this example is watashi, is the possessor of the thing that comes after it, which in this case is kuruma, meaning car. So with just these two examples, we can already see how particles work. They tell us something about the word that comes before them and how it relates to the rest of the sentence. To help us understand this better and understand particles better, let's see how roles work in English sentences. Let's take a really basic example. Taro saw Noriko. So we have three words. The most important word, I would argue, is the verb, which is in the middle. This is the action word. We also have Taro, who is the subject of the verb. The subject is the person who is doing the action. So in this case, we know that Taro is the one doing the seeing, or who did the seeing. So he is the subject of this verb. And we know that he is the subject because it comes before the verb. It is that word order that tells us who the subject is. The other piece of the sentence is Noriko, who is the object of the verb. The object is the person or thing that the action is done to. And particularly in English, we know this because it comes after the verb. The object is the thing that comes immediately after the verb. There are some situations where that's not true, but in a basic sentence like this, the reason we know that it's Taro who saw Noriko and not Noriko who saw Taro, for example, is because Taro comes before the verb and Noriko comes after the verb. That word order tells us the roles of those people in this sentence. So generally in English, word order tells us the subject, the object, and a few other things. The other thing that is used to define roles in English is prepositions. So we have all these examples here: time, location, means, origin, destination, co-participant. We use prepositions like in, on, at, by, from, to, with. And we use those before words or phrases to tell us how they relate to the main part of the sentence, which is the subject, verb, object core. For example, if we wanted to say, Taro saw Noriko at the library on Sunday, then what we would do is we would take our core part of the sentence, Taro saw Noriko, and then we would use a preposition to say on Sunday, and another one to say at the library. And so those prepositions tell us how each of those things relate to that core action. But this is how we build English sentences. We build a core, we have a core part of the sentence, which is the subject, verb, object, and then we can add on other things using prepositional phrases. So now that we can see how roles of different words and phrases are defined in an English sentence, let's see how it works in Japanese. We can start off by using this diagram. This shows the relationship between the verb and each of the major components of the sentence. For example, the means is defined using the particle de. The location is also defined using the particle de. Time, ni, subject, ga, topic, wa, object, o, and so on. These all relate to the verb. So the big difference is that particles define all of the major roles in a sentence, not word order. In English, the subject and the object were defined using word order. We didn't need prepositions to tell us what the subject or the object of the verb was. In Japanese, both of those things are also defined using particles. So you can see we have subject ga and object o in there. Now, there is a sort of typical word order that is used in Japanese, or that is common, I should say, but it's not so much done for grammatical reasons that things have to be in a certain order, but just for the way words and phrases naturally flow. Also, the way that emphasis needs to be placed on certain things. The word order does tend to follow certain patterns, but because we have particles, we can really mess around with the word order a lot, and as long as we use the right particles with the right things, then the meaning of the sentence will be right. If we now go and have a look and compare the roles in Japanese with those in English, we see that first of all, the big difference is that in English we use word order to determine the subject and the object. The order of those words in relation to the verb tells us who it is that's doing the action and who or what it is that the action is done to. Whereas in Japanese, that information is determined using particles. Aside from that, there's actually a lot of similarities. In English, we use prepositions to relate each additional piece of information to that core subject-verb-object part of the sentence, and in Japanese, we use particles to relate that information in a similar way. Now that we have a general understanding of what particles are and how they work, let's look at a couple of the most common and very, very useful particles. The first one we're going to look at is the object particle o. The particle o, which is usually pronounced o and not wo as it's written, defines the object of the verb. What that means is that o tells us who or what the action was done to. If we have a look at our example sentence from earlier, we had Taro saw Noriko. The object is Noriko. She is the person who was seen. She's the person that the action was done to. So she's the object of the verb saw. For this in Japanese, we use the particle o. Now let's see how we would build this sentence in Japanese. We have Taro saw Noriko, which is a subject, a verb, and an object, as we saw in English. And the word order alone is enough to tell us who is playing what role in that sentence. In Japanese, we have Taro. Taro is the topic, marked by the particle wa, and Noriko is the object, marked by the particle o. Each of these, the topic and the object, relate to the verb, which is mimashita, the past tense of to see. So now let's put that together into a sentence. To say Taro saw Noriko, in Japanese we would say Taro wa Noriko o mimashita. Taro wa Noriko o mimashita. Let's break that down now and look at each of the components. First of all, we have the verb at the end. The verb always goes at the end, and that's the action word mimashita, which is the past tense of to see, which is saw. Then at the beginning of the sentence, we have taro wa. So taro is the topic marked by the particle wa. We know that taro is the topic because wa comes immediately after it. That tells us that taro is the topic, and the topic is the thing that the sentence is talking about. So it tells us that this sentence is about taro. The wa tells us that information. Then we have Noriko o. Noriko is the object marked by the particle o. She is the person who this action was done to. She is the one that was seen. And we know this because the object marking particle o comes immediately after Noriko. So altogether we get Taro wa Noriko o mimashita. Now let's look at another particle, the destination particle ni. The particle ni defines the destination of an action involving movement. So here's a simple example of this. Taro went to school. Taro wa gakkou ni ikimashita. Taro wa gakkou ni ikimashita. Now, if we break this down, we have two components of things we already know. We know that the topic is taro, and this is marked by wa. And we know that the verb goes at the end. In this case, the verb is ikimashita, which is went. In the middle, we have gakkou ni. This is the destination, and we know this because gakkou, meaning school, is marked by the particle ni. And if we look at this in our diagram, we can see how each of those pieces connects back to the verb. Taro relates to it as the topic through wa, and gakko relates to it as the destination through ni. Now let's try using several particles together in a single sentence. Let's try this sentence. Taro gave a book to Noriko. Taro wa Noriko ni hon o agemashita. Taro wa Noriko ni hon o agemashita. Let's look at each of the pieces. We have the topic again, taro, marked by the particle wa. We have the object, which is hon, that means book, marked by the particle o. And we have the destination, which is Noriko, marked by the particle ni. So she's not a destination in the traditional meaning of that word, but she is the destination of where that book is going. So that's why we use the particle ni in this case, because that's where the book is heading towards in this action, the act of giving. So the verb we have is agemashita, which is gave, the past tense of give. So when we put this into a sentence, we get taro wa, the topic, Noriko ni, the destination, hon o, the object, and agemashita, the verb, which is always at the end. Taro wa Noriko ni hon o agemashita. Each particle tells us how the word or phrase before it is involved in the action, what role it plays in relation to the verb. We're talking about Taro, the destination is Noriko, the thing being given is the book, and the action is giving. And that's the key to understanding particles in Japanese. Particles tell us the role of the word or phrase that comes before them. And one important difference with English is that in Japanese, we don't use word order to define certain roles. In English, word order tells us the subject and object, but in Japanese, particles do that job, and because of that, word order in Japanese is quite flexible. As we saw, the particle wa is used to mark the topic. The topic is kind of like the subject, but not quite. We won't get into that here because that's a whole other concept in and of itself. But regardless, we use the particle wa to mark the topic, and we use the particle o to mark the object, the person or thing that the action is done to. We also looked at the particle ni, which we use to mark the destination of an action involving movement. We place these particles after the word or phrase that describes the thing in that role. And with just these 3 particles, you can already start building real Japanese sentences. There are, of course, many more particles, and there are other types of particles as well that work a little bit differently. For example, we briefly saw the particle no, which is a different type of particle to these other ones. It still tells us the role of the word before it, but instead of relating it to the verb, it connects words together, like watashi no kuruma. There's a lot more to explore with particles, things like how to expand elements within a sentence, how word order can change, and other particles like de, to, and kara. If you want to go deeper into how Japanese sentences really work, check out my full course, 80-20 Japanese Foundations. I'll leave a link in the description. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. よろしくお願いします。